A warm welcome to our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Thanks for joining us this 1 hour of world news. Here's what's coming up within the hour. Well, we're getting feedback from the U.S.-Ukraine talks. Sorry about the picture up there. Holding in Saudi Arabia, Ukrainian officials saying the talks have been constructive so far. Also, the cargo ship that collided with a jet fuel tanker on Monday off the coast of East Yorkshire is still on fire. The owners say. We have updates on the story. Plus, more than 80% of U.S. aid programs officially ending after a 6-week purge. Let's begin the world today. And we're beginning with news just in. The U.S. President Donald Trump saying he will double tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum from 25% to 50%. In a deepening trade war, Trump says this latest move is in retaliation to the 25% tariffs Ontario placed on electricity it sends to northern U.S. states. In response, Ontario's premier says we will not back down. He calls on Trump to stop the chaos. Trump says the tariffs will begin on Wednesday, adding that he'll declare a national emergency on electricity in those states. And the latest escalation comes after the worst day of 2025 for U.S. markets, fueled by fears of President Donald Trump's aggressive tariffs on America's biggest trading partners. We're having developments of the story in a few minutes. But in just a few hours now, we've heard news from Saudi Arabia in Jeddah, where talks are ongoing between U.S. officials, led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Ukrainian officials regarding an end to the war in Ukraine. On the Ukrainian side, the talks are going on in a constructive way, so say officials. Leaders took a break from the talks and are back in the meeting room now. On the Ukrainian side, you have Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha and Zelensky's closest aide, Andriy Yermak, and Defense Minister Rustem Umerev. The U.S. side has Marco Rubio and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. Hours ago, Zelensky's aide posted on social media platform X that work is in progress. He's also remarked that Ukrainians want peace more than anyone. So the U.S. officials are going into the talks today with a plan for a partial ceasefire with Russia, hoping to restore support from its key benefactor. Ukraine will also be presented the U.S. side with such a plan. The initiative of the talks in Jeddah aims to restore support from its principal ally, which is the United States, under President Trump, who's been pressing for concessions to resolve the ongoing conflict that has persisted for 3 years. And this meeting in Jeddah marks the highest level engagement since a contentious White House visit last month, where President Volodymyr Zelensky faced criticism from Trump for perceived ingratitude. In the wake of this reprimand, Washington has suspended military aid to Ukraine, including intelligence sharing and access to satellite imagery, in an effort to drive Kyiv to the negotiating table. Zelensky, who attended the talks with Saudi leaders on Monday, has since delegated the negotiations to 3 senior aides, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, alongside Trump's National Security Advisor Mark Waltz, all both expressed hope that the suspension of aid could be resolved during the discussions. In the meantime, ahead of the talks today, the Russian Ministry of Defense says 3 people were killed during what it claims is the largest drone attack on the country since its invasion of Ukraine 3 years ago. It said 337 drones were shot down overnight across the country, almost double the previous high of 180 on January 14 this year. In this latest attack, 91 drones were shot down over the Moscow region. 2 days ago, the Ukrainian Air Force claimed to have downed 520 drones and 34 missiles between March 3rd and March 9th. The Ukrainian military has acknowledged it struck a number of strategic objects, including a production capacity of the Moscow oil refinery. The armed forces says the refinery is capable of processing 11 million tons of oil per year and provides 40 to 50% of Moscow's diesel and gasoline. A statement it released also says that it hit a production station in Orlov, which it says is important in managing an oil pipeline supply to a seaport in St. Petersburg. Let's bring in our Washington correspondent, Maria Bird. Maria, thanks for joining us on the program. I want to begin with President Donald Trump's remarks. This just a few hours before the program started, the new tariffs he's imposed on Canada, upping tariffs from 25% to 50% on Canadian steel and aluminum. Well, this was President Trump, suspending those tariffs a few days ago and then now reimposing them. Tell us more about this.
Well, this is something I think that many Americans were not expecting, but I think they're not surprised. These even larger tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum is really what many are considering a retaliation for Ontario's export surcharge on U.S. electricity. This comes as, Trump is set to speak with CEOs of some of the large American companies later this afternoon, as there are many fears across America around recession. And the stock market, as we know, has definitely struggled over the past few days, and the speculations around whether or not that the stock market troubling and challenges is a way to increase buyers, or is it really a potential risk that we're seeing and concerns around the economic policies. This is also obviously putting pressure on the Federal Reserve to make actions around interest rates. So there's quite a few questions I think that many Americans are asking.
Yeah, and it is still confusing, even when you're asking the questions, there doesn't seem to be a lot coming from the Trump administration. The Canadian government has responded. The Premier of Ontario did say we will not back down. He calls on Trump to stop the chaos. I mean, just the other day, the new Canadian Prime Minister-elect, I should say, Mark Carney, also said that Canada will be standing up against the U.S. They will not be giving in or cowering to Donald Trump's demands. But those tariffs from Canada, however, still remain on U.S. products, despite President Trump announcing a suspension last week. This trade war, because that's what it's come to, it does seem to be a potential in destroying relations between the two who have had really good ties even before the Trump administration.
Yes, as we know, there's very little conversation between the U.S. and Canada around trade. There's always almost been an open border. At one point, you didn't even need a passport to go to Canada. It was only a type of birth certificate that you would need to cross the border. So the U.S. and Canada have had close relationships. There are Americans that go each and every day almost between the U.S. and Canada that live right there in those bordering states. And so this is new territory for Americans to see this type of trade war between the very close ally and obviously the neighboring country. And so it's in a position now that I think that Americans are going to start to closely watch because this is going to start to have a major impact on the cost that Americans see each and every day as they go into retail stores and obviously thinking about building homes, thinking about car manufacturing. This is going to definitely be something that they are going to be considering.
Yeah, and the cost of living crisis continues in the U.S. Let's focus on the talks going on in Saudi Arabia now. How is the meeting between the U.S. and Ukrainian officials being viewed back home? What are people saying about this? Are they even interested in the fact that the U.S. is able to come to some sort of agreement with Ukraine to hold these talks?
So, I think that they're interested. I think to your point, there's a lot happening at one time. I mean, obviously, and I know we might even talk about at this point, we're in the midst of, once again, a potential government shutdown on Friday. So I think that's the real news that Americans are watching, especially as we deal with all the federal government challenges of people that have been laid off. And so the Ukraine war, I think, is a part of the everyday conversation of Americans and knowledge base, but I don't know if it's hit the level of priority. The only difference, obviously, here is that we're talking about top Trump administration officials meeting with Ukrainian Ukrainian delegation, which does not include the Ukrainian President Zelensky, in the latest rounds of high talks as we seek to get a deal between the Russian war and Ukraine. So I think they're looking to see if it's a work in progress. I don't know if they're how optimistic they are that we will end up seeing some sort of conclusion as a result of this, but I think that at this time, there's just so many hot button topics that this is just another one that Americans are watching to see what will be the outcome.
I see the U.S. putting the burden, the onus of ending this war on the Ukrainian side. At least that's what officials are making it seem. One point I do need to make here is there are 3 Ukrainian officials attending these talks. There are only 2 U.S. officials, Marco Rubio and National Security Advisor Mark Waltz. But Ukraine has a pretty impressive lineup on its own side. Is it fair that the U.S. is making Ukraine do the heavy lifting in ending this war?
So I think this is a different position from where the U.S. was just a few months ago. The U.S. obviously was providing major support to Ukraine for the war and supporting Ukraine in that effort, and obviously bringing on global allies to assist in those efforts. But as we know and as we've seen in the past, the current president has a relationship with Russia that precedes this current administration. And so to see the different approach and perspective to how we can end the war, I think was expected by many Americans. I don't think that it was expected that the onus was going to be put necessarily where it was previously, or the kind of attention and the perspective being where previous President Biden focused in on. I think this, is an approach that I believe that President Trump believes could work. As he believes, obviously, that the previous approach was not one that led us to the ending of the war. And so I think Americans are looking to see how this will play out. And you mentioned the issue of fair and just. I don't know if we really can have those thoughts as we're talking about a war that has been underway for quite some time now. I don't know if Americans are seeing this as a fair and just. I think that Americans are hopeful that the killing ends, that the humanity efforts are being able to continue, and that people are able to, at some level, be able to live dignity and able to have, things restored in a manner that is appropriate.
President Trump said yesterday that Ukraine does not hold any cards and may lose this war. It almost sounds like he's given the victory to Russia, which is the approach he seems to have taken since he stepped into trying to mediate an end to this war.
Yes, it's very different approach, as you said, and I think Americans are not necessarily looking for a winner or a loser. They're really looking for peace, and so I think that's the hope and the prayer from Americans is that there can be peace in the region, and obviously those who are suffering as a result of this war are able to find some peace and move out of, because there's so much more rebuilding that has to be done, years of rebuilding, and not only physical rebuilding, but rebuilding for generations to come who have been scarred by the trauma that exists as a result of the war.
Maria, what does the U.S. expect from this meeting? How would it be a win for President Trump or for America in general?
So I think the win is an end to the war. I think that's really where the Trump administration, and we know that the president has been, even in these now almost 2 full months. I guess we're heading into the second month of his being in office. He has been very clear about the wins he's even had in 30 days, 45 days. And I think this is another area that he would like to put a check mark as his administration being able to address some global conflict. I think he understands, he's been a president before, that 4 years goes pretty quickly. And you really only have about 2 years to make substantial changes, because by year 3, people begin to start looking at the next administration and who will start the campaigns and really focusing on the next 4 years. And so I think he's moving as fast as he can to get the things done that he believes his campaign said they would do. And I think this war is one of those areas that he's hoping to be a part of negotiating the deal for.
He's doing a lot, Maria. He is doing a lot. It almost feels like he's been president for a year already. Thanks again for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
In the meantime, Secretary General of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, Feridun Sinerioglu, has visited Moscow. He was there yesterday and was shown the aftermath of reported Ukrainian drone attacks. He made his remarks on the issue during a press conference with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov.
Russian Federation is an OSCE co-founder, and it is a very important partner within the OSCE. I would like to continue to work with Russia on the peace and security for all in Europe objective. This war has brought a lot of pain and suffering to millions of people. I was in Kiev and I saw also similar incidents there. I do hope that we will see very soon the end of the war and we will no longer witness these incidents, neither in Moscow nor in Kiev.
Now, Sweden's security service, SAPO, says Russia poses the greatest threat to the country due to its aggressive attitude towards the West. It wrote in its annual report that while Sweden joining the NATO military alliance has strengthened its security, it had also led to increased Russian intelligence activity. Russia denies any wrongdoing. SAPO also says the security situation in Sweden is serious, with foreign powers operating in more threatening ways with hybrid warfare alongside incidents of violent extremism. The head of SAPO, Charlotte von Essen, said there was a tangible risk that the security situation can deteriorate further in a way that may be hard to predict. Sweden became a NATO member just last year, seeing it as the best guarantee against Russia following its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022. Meanwhile, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has warned that Russia is spending more than all of Europe combined, as she reiterated her €800 billion plan to rearm the bloc. She was speaking at the plenary session of the EU Parliament in Strasbourg earlier today. Ms. von der Leyen also claimed that she saw a level of consensus on European defence at last week's Emergency European Council.
We are facing a crisis of European security, but we know that it is in crises that Europe has always been built. So this is a moment for peace through strength. This is the moment for a common defence effort. And at the European Council, I saw a level of consensus on European defence which is not just unprecedented, but was completely unthinkable only a few weeks ago. There is a new understanding that we must think differently and act accordingly. We have started to mobilize Europe's massive resources, and in the coming weeks and months, more courage will be necessary and other difficult choices await us. After the end of the Cold War, some believed that Russia could be integrated in Europe's economic and security architecture. Others hoped that we could rely indefinitely on America's full protection. And so we lowered our guard. We cut our defense spending from routinely averaging more than 3.5% to less than half of that. We thought we were enjoying a peace dividend, but in reality, we were just running a security deficit. And this is the goal of the plan that I presented to leaders last week. Its logic is very simple. We want to pull every single financial lever we have to strengthen and fast-track our defense production. With the Rearmed Europe plan, we can mobilize up to €800 billion. First, there is the so-called national escape clause. This can transform our defense budgets quickly and effectively, Member States could mobilize up to 650 billion euros over the next 4 years, adding round about 1.5% of GDP to their defense budgets over 4 years. The second point, the European Council has agreed on our proposal for a new financial instrument. We call it SAFE, Security Action for Europe. We offer member states up to 150 billion euros in loans to invest following a few basic principles. And this leads me to my third point, the cohesion funds. This is a possibility that we are offering to member states. Member states will have the possibility to redirect some of their uncommitted funds to defense-related projects. This could be infrastructure, it could be research and development. This would be voluntary.
The vast majority of U.S. Agency for International Development's U.S. aid programs have been terminated after a 6-week purge, according to U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. On social media platform X, Rubio said that the initiatives spent tens of billions in ways that did not deserve or harmed U.S. interests. The remaining programs, just 18%, will now be administered by the State Department. Humanitarian organizations around the world have warned that the controversial move to end long-running U.S. aid programs is already having dire consequences around the world, potentially endangering lives. The Trump administration has repeatedly made clear that it wants overseas spending to be closely aligned with its America First approach. Shortly after Trump returned to the White House on January 20, thousands of U.S. aid employees were put on leave, and those working overseas were recalled. Let's bring in African science and international relations expert, Professor Chris Isike. He joins us from Pretoria in South Africa. Professor, thank you for joining us on the program. And I'm hearing the U.S. president say, you know, there's so much money going into U.S. aid programs. There doesn't seem to be very little returns for the United States. But lots of people have lost their jobs because of this. So is the number significant enough to be Africa's problem? Because I know that the continent benefits a lot from these different aspects, you know, that the U.S. aid goes into.
Well, thank you for having me, and good evening to your viewers. Yeah, it's correct that, you know, a lot of people will be put out of their jobs, but what is, especially in recipient countries. But what is also correct is that millions of jobs and a good number of industries in the U.S. will also be adversely affected by, you know, you said a freeze. But on the African side, especially given our overdependence on foreign aid, especially U.S. aid, the effects are actually significant. You know, for example, the USAID shutdown has actually undermined essential services in many African countries, leading to increased health crisis, food insecurity, and overall instability. And some of the worst hit countries include Kenya, where you know, the freeze has actually severely disrupted the distribution of ARVs, medication for those people living with HIV and AIDS. You can also talk about the same things in South Africa, where 17% of its health budget was provided for by USAID through PEPFAR. Sudan, Ethiopia, and even Nigeria are also not spared from these, you know, adverse effects.
Yeah, and for Nigeria, U.S. aid has contributed approximately $2.8 billion to healthcare in this country. Now, we once heard a U.S. senator saying that such monies have been diverted to financing terrorism in the country. This is disputable, however. But the Minister of Health says a committee has been set up to develop a transition and sustainability plan for U.S. aid-funded programs. How soon before we begin to experience the impact of the withdrawal of this aid from the country?
Well, let me start by saying that I would be careful about Republican talking points about, you know, USAID, especially when they offer no proof. However, the shutdown poses significant challenges, which are immediate to Nigeria's health infrastructure and humanitarian efforts, and this has, like you said, necessitated measures to mitigate the impact on vulnerable populations. And perhaps that in itself is some proof that the support USAID was offering Nigeria. I mean, if you talk about HIV and AIDS treatment alone, over 2 million Nigerians living with HIV depend on USAID-funded medications to maintain viral suppression. So the freezing of aid has led to closure of several treatment clinics that have disrupted essential services, especially for these patients. And if you want to talk about the effect more broadly, experts have estimated that about 30% of Nigerians benefit directly from these funded programs, and the withdrawal of this support could lead to, a worsening humanitarian crisis, particularly affecting, vulnerable populations such as women, children, and the marginalized, who are also suffering from the hard crunch of the economy in Nigeria today.
Yeah, and the economy really doing a number on all of us. So there have been debates, however, as to the cuts. U.S. aid is said to be massive to many African countries. You pointed out earlier in the discussion. What does that say, however, about Trump's policy towards Africa?
Look, in November and December last year, I spoke to a number of U.S. diplomats, and what I heard them say was that the U.S. has been concerned about how Africa has kind of undermined the support that the U.S. has been giving to them compared to how we treat China, for example. And many of them expressed concerns about whether the U.S. was not, better off engaging with Africa on a transactional basis like China does. And I think that Trump's transactional approach and preference for bilateral engagement helps to solidify that position that it's better to deal with Africa transactionally, and that's what Trump is going to do.
Interesting. And I know that many African countries have already begun to readjust their priorities based on things that the U.S. president has been saying. Right now, his focus is on Ukraine. It's on Gaza. He has, places where the U.S. has been directing funds to Israel to help with the war in Gaza, and then to Ukraine, where President Trump is trying to, broker peace between Ukraine and Russia. So Africa really does look like it's at the bottom of America's priority list. But do you think that that could change, for African countries that have made the U.S. a #1 diplomatic and trade partner?
Well, they can, if they can reorganize state and governance to make it more functional to the needs of Africans. The continent already has, the requisite human and material resources to be, self-sufficient without dependence on foreign aid. So the major challenge you will have is inept governance, which undermines the potential of the state to drive transformation and what we call development. So the change is possible if African leaders just set their priorities right and begin to make state and governance to work for people, and rather than depend on the largesse that and soft, low-hanging fruits that foreign aid brings to these countries.
Professor Chris Esike, thank you so much for joining us on the program today.
Thank you for having me.
Moving to other stories now, a 59-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter over the North Sea collision. One of the ships, the Solong, is still alight after it collided with an oil tanker on Monday. One crew member of the Solong is unaccounted for, and the working assumption is that they have died, according to the UK minister. Owners of the cargo ship say it was not carrying sodium cyanide, as previously reported, but had 4 empty containers that had once held the toxic chemical. Russian, Chinese, and Iranian warships have been seen on the Arabian Sea as they travel towards the Iranian southeastern coast to take part in the 7th Combined Maritime Security Belt exercise of 2025. Russian corvette Alder Sidenopov and Russian fast-track craft Nezer P-235 sailed alongside a fuel supply ship as they traveled towards a military base in Konarak. Later, Russian sailors were seen disembarking boats and attending a press conference. The exercise will see the participation of the naval fleets from Russia and China joining forces with the Iranian Navy in the 3rd Naval Zone. Beijing did announce it will be sending the Type 052D guided missile destroyer Bao-2 and supply ship Gao Yuhu to participate in the drills. Well, thousands of energy industry leaders, executives, and experts are all gathered at the George Brown Convention Center in Houston, Texas this week for the 2025 edition of the World Energy Conference, CERAWeek. The conference will feature discussions on energy policy, technological advancements, and industry trends. Attendees will hear directly from members of the Trump cabinet, including Energy Secretary Chris Wright, as the administration promotes its plan for energy dominance. On the sidelines of the event, though, have been these protests that we've seen outside against the conference. The local police tried to keep them off on the sidewalk, arresting some who were unruly and ensuring the protesters did not move from where they were assigned to stay. Many of them say leaders and industry players have not acted in the interest of the people.
So can you tell me the essence of all of this protest, what's going on?
Yeah, we are living in a world that the climate is changing. The people who are making money just continue to want to stuff their already overstuffed pockets with more money, even though we know that continued extraction of carbon from underground in the form of oil and gas and coal and adding it to the atmosphere is causing climate change, which is increasing suffering and premature death. We come from communities all over that already have a lot of oil and gas infrastructure, and the idea that we're going to build more and more at a time when we know better, and it's causing suffering. Enough is enough.
The experts say that everything around us is gotten from fossil fuel.
Yeah, my shirt.
The bag you're wearing, the shirt you're wearing.
Yeah, but you know what? It hasn't always been that way, and it doesn't mean it has to always continue to be that way. And when we know better, we have to act better, and we know better. I'm from Southwest Louisiana. We've been told that LNG is a climate solution. But the truth is, it has brought no prosperity to a coast that keeps getting hit by climate disasters. It does not do anything for the people of the community. You know, selling gas overseas to the highest bidder drives up the cost of everything in America. American electricity, manufactured goods, fertilizer for food. It's America last to continue building out LNG export, oil export infrastructure. And the continued dependency on fossil fuels is a problem. We can make money and move if that's the answer the corporates need to hear. See, it's possible to make money and shift.
Do I have anything against fossil fuels? Actually, I do. And let me explain why. Fossil fuel is a dirty substance. It's a very dirty substance. It's a substance that is gas that's from the earth, which is our byproduct. It's supposed to stay in the earth, okay? So what we do from fracking, from breaking the hole in the ground, to sending it to processing, and to shipping overseas, it pollutes the planet everywhere it goes.
A quick one. What will be your alternative to all the benefits of fossil fuel?
We have to look for alternatives. Just like we went and found that fossil fuel in the ground, we got wind, we got solar. If we know that fossil fuels and natural gas is hurting our environment, don't we supposed to change that? Every last one of us can't go to Mars with Elon Musk.
This clothes you're wearing is a product of petrochemical from fossil fuel, brother.
Everything we have is a product of some kind of chemical. But answer this question, why would America sell fossil fuels around the world with our energy source for our country, for our people, and sell it to another country to weaken us as Americans? I serve my country. Why are we selling our resources to another country when we got to pay more here? Our children paying for it with cancer. Our children paying for it with asthma. Our communities paying for it with no economical growth. Freeport has been 57 years, the city of Freeport got 15 industrial companies in Freeport. Freeport is the bottom of the federal poverty level. We are listed as a non-attainment ozone layer. That means our environment, our water, our air, our salt, everything is completely toxic. We got to sit down to the table. We got to come up with solutions, but we ain't here to fight one another. We here to make solutions like this. We got to come together for the next generation.
Staying with the conference, our energy correspondent Olu Phillips was reporting from the sidelines of the venue. He spoke about the protest as well as the negotiations going on inside.
Downtown Houston, precisely somewhere around the George Brown Convention Center, where the International Conference on Energy is holding. And just before this conference gets on the way, there's been a massive disruption from climate change enthusiasts, from those who have issues with what the governments of the world is doing, while what city mayors are doing, and what the President of America is doing as regarding drill, baby drill, and fossil fuel production. And you know that back home here, or back home in Nigeria, fossil fuel production, fossil fuel extraction, gas has become the transition fuel as enunciated and accentuated by the federal government. But it seems like the global community is standing very strong. A few of them who are protesting this whole entire processes of crude oil extraction and the fossil fuel business, and calling for new ways. We're not very sure what the thin line is between their understanding of the essence of fossil fuel and what it does in terms of our daily lives, like the petrochemical extracts and the things that petrochemical serves in our lives. They are not also saying the total elimination of crude oil and fossil fuel, but also there's the confusion as to what exactly they want. You can see the rally behind me massively ramping up, and the Houston police are also shoving them back and pushing them back to the sidewalks using not so lethal force. Earlier we almost got arrested trying to do this, but as soon as we identified ourselves as a crew from Channels Television, Nigeria's most awarded station, a quick check was run and we were allowed to continue filming. You can see all over this place. Right behind me is the convention center where the conference is currently on the way, but the protesters are still protesting and calling for a stop and a shift in focus from fossil fuel to other means we are yet to see. The billionaires and all of that, they have something against anybody who is doing this business, but we'll still keep you posted on the outcomes of this protest happening in downtown Houston, Texas, here in the United States of America. From downtown Houston, Olu Phillips for Channels Television News.
We'll stay with our lead story now, which is a U.S. and Ukraine meeting going on in Saudi Arabia. Just to bring you up to speed with what's happened in the last hour or so, U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz says the talks with Ukraine on ending the war are getting there. His words: officials have been locked in the meeting now for several hours, which started this morning. For Ukraine, the talks are about making up with Donald Trump, who has been a major figure in these talks. He's the one who's called them anyway. 3 people have been killed, however, overnight in drone attacks on Moscow. It's one of the largest attacks, according to the Russian military, that has happened since the war started. Let's bring in the chairman of the Nigerians in Diaspora Organization, Dr. Gordon Ibe. He joins us from Moscow in Russia. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us on the program. First off, you're not affected by these drone strikes by Ukraine, are you?
Sorry, I didn't get that. You said what?
You're not affected by the drone strikes that were sent from Ukraine to Russia?
I am not better than those who have been affected, or even more protected than those who have been affected. We could just say the grace and the mercy of God. Sorry if I sound religious on TV, but I'm just trying to highlight the potential of this terrorist attack to affect any innocent civilian who has absolutely nothing to do with fighting, even on the combat zone. I think it's very shameful and disgraceful what is going on, and I think that obviously there will be measures, there will be answers, but I hope that life has failed.
Yes, and that's how many other innocent people have been caught up in the fighting in Ukraine. But I wondered before now, the narrative accompanying this meeting holding in Saudi Arabia, what is Russian media reporting on the talks in Saudi Arabia, or are they even reporting it at all?
Well, they are, of course. There are so many news agencies that are reporting it. The thing is that the Russian position is quite clear, and this is coming at the back. Many of the things that happen are still in the media spotlight, like this drone attack. But the main thing that should be on the spot, on the front line, is that Russia has regained most of its territory that was taken over by the Ukraine. The Kursk region, the Suja region. There's been lots of gains over the past 2-3 days, and it's made the whole Suja operation a big, massive failure. And I also feel that this drone attack is a kind of deflection of that success on the battlefield. But at the same time, I think that is also reported in the news as well as this negotiation. Anything, we've always maintained that when if Ukraine and Russia isn't on the negotiation table, any meeting of people isn't the best, especially considering the major players in geopolitics like Russia and the United States. They have to be involved in any sort of discussion.
I know that the Russian officials are closely watching this meeting going on, and the Russian side has already said that they are not confident about, the outcome of this meeting. Why do you think that is? Why isn't Russia seeing this as serious, especially for the part of the Ukrainians who have been the main recipients of Russian airstrikes and drone attacks over the past 3 years?
Well, because Russia doesn't really feel Ukraine is ready for peace. There's still a presidential decree on ban on that or ban on negotiations. But it's kind of opening up. The United States, by the way, feels Zelensky is not ready for peace. Russia doesn't really think Ukraine is ready for peace. And of course, Ukraine is egged on by Europe, both sponsorship and a rhetoric. So for that reason, there's this skepticism, or do I say pessimism. Meanwhile, while this is all going on, Russia is making gains on the combat zone, on the battleground. We don't know how many more percent of Ukraine needs to be taken before Zelensky realizes that it's time for peace. I think anyone who wants to be honest and who really loves even Ukraine and seeing what is going on and the land that's been, how it's been, it's not only Russia that is there in Ukraine. We also have it being split up by mineral resources being wanted by the United States, by Europe, everyone having a stake or a piece of the pie. It's very, very painful to watch. I think anyone it's just like in the Bible, the story of Solomon, and who was settling the problem with two mothers who claimed to be mothers. The real mother said, no, don't divide the child. Let her take the child. As long as the child wouldn't be divided into two, I'll be fine. That's always the position of a real mother. That's the position of a real a lover of a country. When you see a country being dissected, you want peace. You want it, being prevented, even if you do not win at that particular point in time. So we can see that the interests are not the natural instinct, the natural care for the country, and that is why this has gone through.
What do you think, Doctor, should be the bargaining chip that would bring that necessary breakthrough in Saudi Arabia?
Like I said, there's no, for Russia, the bargaining chip is clear: military force and geopolitical status. For US, it's clear: military support for Ukraine and intelligence information. For Ukraine, there's basically no bargaining chip except the EU support. That's the last arm of support for Ukraine as now. And basically, in such a position, it is clear that the Ukrainian side will have to make a lot of concessions if both sides are going to, reach a peace deal, because the dynamics are not in Ukrainian favor in any way. Both financially, intelligence-wise, but as they do not have the U.S. fully behind them at the point in time. So I think it's just a reality that someone needs to wake up to and act based on it.
Dr. Gordon Ibe, always a pleasure having you on the program. Thank you for making time for us today.
Thank you for having me.
Away from the talks in Saudi Arabia, residents of Greenland are going to the polls today, voting in previous years, and a vote that in previous years has drawn little outside attention, but which may prove pivotal for the Arctic territory's future. U.S. President Donald Trump's repeated interest in acquiring Greenland has put it firmly in the spotlight and fueled the long-standing debate on the island's future ties with Copenhagen. According to Danish Greenlandic policy experts in the Arctic, there's never been a spotlight like this on Greenland before. Greenland has been controlled by Denmark, nearly 3,000 kilometers away, for about 300 years. It governs its own domestic affairs, but decisions on foreign and defense policy are made in Copenhagen. Now, 5 out of 6 parties on the ballot favor Greenland's independence from Denmark, differing only on how quickly that should come about. During his 4-day visit to Nigeria, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change Executive Secretary Simon Steele highlighted Nigeria's climate action as the gateway to a new era of growth and prosperity, fueled by clean and affordable energy available for all. He was speaking with our environment correspondent, Ayola Kasim.
The impacts of climate change on not only my own home, but vulnerable communities around the world, coming here to Nigeria, seeing the impacts again firsthand. I have the privilege in this role as Executive Secretary to visit many countries and seeing the impacts. And when I see how that impacts ordinary people, communities, families, businesses, it's heartbreaking. But that gives me the perspective and the energy in terms of what can be very, very frustrating within the negotiating process, which to many, especially those who are on the front lines of climate change, that see these negotiations that take place on an annual basis for 2-3 weeks as very abstract and sometimes question the purpose of that. But I go into these in my role as a custodian of the process, as a facilitator, supporting the close to 200 countries that are part of this intergovernmental process. I said I'm always driven by, however exhausting, however frustrating, what it is we're actually trying to achieve, which is to address the climate crisis, but more importantly, have a positive impact on ordinary people the world over and nature. So that's what drives me and keeps me very, very focused. And when we look at, as frustrating as this process is, significant progress has been made over the past 10 years since the signing of the Paris Agreement. Before Paris, we were on track for a 5-degree increase in global warming, which would be a death sentence for the whole of humanity. We're currently down to just below 3 degrees, which is still far below the 1.5 degrees we need to be in order to create a sustainable planet for all of us. We will see at the end of this year, when countries come back with the actions they're committing to through their nationally determined contributions, their NDCs, what actions are taken, and collectively what that means to that global effort, and where we are in going from 5 degrees to 3 degrees, and how much closer to 2 and 1.5 degrees where we need to be.
But then during the last COP, they're calling for reform, change what it is that we have at the moment. In your opinion, what reform do you think we need for UNFCCC?
Ultimately, it's for parties to decide. It is a process that they own, and we as custodians can provide guidance. We will be working with an expert group throughout the course of this year with suggestions as to how the process could evolve. And this being Paris plus 10 years after the Paris Agreement, I think is a perfect opportunity for us to reflect and then look forward and to see how the process can evolve in a way that maintains that party-driven process philosophy, but looks at how the quality of decision-making, the speed of decision-making can be improved so that it is more reflective of the urgency of the action that needs to be taken.
And then, you know, people from my part of the world, which is the African continent, are saying that the balance is tilted against them.
Last year we saw somewhere in the region of $2 trillion invested in the transition. But those facts show that only a fraction of that went to developing and emerging emerging countries. So how that is rebalanced is going to be absolutely critical. Leaving Baku last year with COP29 with a new framework for climate finance, there is that opportunity, whether it's the delivery of the 300 billion, a tripling of commitments from developed countries, from external sources to support developing countries. And then, of course, the roadmap that needs to be fleshed out this year to get us on course for 1.3 trillion investment per year. So the opportunity to rebalance and ensure the needs of developing countries are more adequately served.
Well, we're looking at 71-year-old Liang. He's a grandpa from China's Chengdu region, and he's capturing attention on social media and ours as well with his age-defying skateboarding skills. Liang rolls over slopes at an indoor skate park where he performs tricks like a youngster. The retiree explains that he grew passionate about the sport around 2 years ago after watching his granddaughter skating with her friends. Liang says the skateboarding keeps him fit and healthy while also helping him to stay connected with younger generations and trends. We've been looking at videos of Liang skateboarding, which have circulated on social media across China and the world, and they've received many views and likes. Well, you can tell he doesn't feel a day older than 30. Thanks for watching The World Today. I'm Amarachi Ubani. See you next time.